Hello and welcome to the Main Engineering Star Trek podcast. So, what does this podcast going to bring? So, this is my Star Trek podcast dedicated to all things Trek. Obviously, we've called it Main Engineering just because I'm an engineer by trade, and I just love the engineer. I love the gold uniform. But anyway. Also, as well, as you're listening to this, going forward, I would love everyone to get involved. So if you are listening to this and you want to get involved, give us a message here, Facebook, anywhere you feel you need to give a message to me. You can do that via email as well. All the information is here on the podcast links, or if you're listening to this on YouTube, you can follow the links there as well. And I would like everyone to get involved. I'd like to have as many people to come on as possible to talk everything, the good, the bad, the ugly, anything to do with Star Trek. And hopefully we can get some guests on and we can go from there. But yeah, I'd like to get as many of you on as possible. This is going to be weekly, so make sure you subscribe and you follow on the networks that you follow on you know whether that's Spotify or anywhere you get your podcasts, or even YouTube. But yeah, so I just want to come on. So we are on the cusp now, or the end of Star Trek Picard and Discovery. We've just had news that we're going to get seasons 2 and 3 of Strange New Worlds. And they've also come out and said that they're doing a new show called Star Trek Academy and a new feature film, but this is one that's going to be exclusive to Paramount Plus, so not coming out of the cinema, sort of like a TV movie. Section 31. Now, this is one of the ones that they've been sitting on for quite a while, actually, since season 2 of Star Trek Discovery. Remember, that was 3 years ago. So this one's been sitting. Obviously, the actress that plays Georgiou, who was going to be in Section 31, has been very busy winning Oscars, obviously. So there's a lot to unpack in this episode. But if you hear anything and you wanna discuss what we've discussed, or I've discussed, or anyone's discussed in this podcast, send us a message, because we don't know unless you tell us what you want to hear and say and everything else. And like I said, if you want to get involved, and we want as many people to get involved with the show, with the channel, as much as possible. So you don't need a fancy setup. All you need is a mobile phone. You can have a link and then we can just have a chat. Anything Trek. So, let's get on to it. So, Star Trek Picard. The end of a very, very long story. I have to admit, I absolutely love Star Trek Picard. And season 3 was the pinnacle. It's interesting as well. I think Star Trek Picard season 3 is what we've always wanted. It's taken 3 years to get there, but it's something that we've always wanted, and it's the end. So they've given us all this other stuff, and then they've given us the sweet stuff at the end, and then they've gone, no, you can't have any more of that. It's understandable as well, Patrick Stewart's getting on now. In fact, the whole cast are. The one thing I came away from Star Trek Picard was age, really. I don't know, it gets to us all, but it was one thing that I very much noticed in the show, and how age and how old they were all getting. And that's what happens with time anyway. But I've got to say, Patrick Stewart doesn't age at all. He's either a Time Lord, or he's got some sort of regime where he just does not age. But the rest of them, they've aged quite a bit. But even down to the other characters. But I mean, Worf, Michael Donnelly plays Worf. He's not aged either. I don't know what they are. They're just not aged. I mean, the other cast members must be a little bit upset with them, because they have aged, and it shows. But anyway, we're getting on to the ages. But yeah, I've got to say, that Star Trek Picard was the top, the pinnacle. I know a lot of people didn't get the the other series, and I sort of get that. A bit like Discovery, I sort of get that too. It doesn't mean that I didn't like it, but I get why people didn't like it and why there was such a backlash, because it was so far removed. Especially when you go back now and you watch season 1, you know, where it's got the Romulans. There's this sort of Romulan plot thing, and then, you know, it's about Data dying, which it's really strange, because that whole plot point was sort of Picard letting go of Data and everything, only for them to bring him back for season 3. We'll just gloss over that. And also with the synth body as well. So Picard dies, and then he gets this sort of synth body which is allowed to age and act as a normal body. I didn't really get that, but it is what it is. It's done now. Season 2 slightly picked up a little bit, but once again I felt that it sort of lost its way slightly, and that's kind of how I feel with a lot of the early seasons of all the Trek shows that we've had. Well, mainly Picard and Discovery, is that the first 2 seasons they sort of lost their way. The first season they lost their way. The second season they were, you know, it was coming slightly, and the third season is slightly where it picks up slightly. But we can do Discovery in another podcast. But we'll talk about Picard in this one. There were in the season 2, it's sort of slight nod. We had some Federation ships that we sort of knew of as well, like the Nova and the Steamrunner and things like that, appeared. So it was sort of going the other way. It was what we wanted, and the Borg were in it as well. So there was that element, or at least the Borg Queen was in it. This season, 100 times better. Why? I think the story was better. There was what we wanted, which was more Federation ships, and it seemed more Trekky, if you can say that, than the previous seasons. Also, as well, it brought everybody back as well. You could probably say, oh, why was Discovery cancelled? Why are they pulled all these projects? It's probably because of season 3 spent the budget for the next 3 years. Because Picard blew. I would imagine that they absolutely tore apart the budget for this movie just to get the people there, and then the sets were amazing as well. I mean, they built, spoiler alert, they built the Enterprise D bridge for the last 2 episodes, and they built it, and you can see it online. There's been discussions about it. They built it and then tore it down. That alone probably cost a bit of money to do that, but I would imagine that sort of blew the budget for Star Trek for quite a while, I would imagine, just to do that. It was nice that they introduced some other characters in there. We got LaForge's daughters and some of the crew from the Titan, which, you know, spoiler alert, is now the Enterprise G, which is weird as well. I know we know in Federation, in Star Trek and Starfleet, they have rechristened ships in honour of other ships. Notably was the Defiant. So the Defiant was destroyed. The San Polo came in and was rechristened the Defiant in honour. In actual fact, that was at the Fleet Museum, so it wasn't the original Defiant. It was the one that was rechristened, that was slightly different. Doesn't have a cloaking device, basically. That was another thing as well. A lot of people I saw online were saying, why didn't they take the cloaking device from the Defiant? Because the San Polo didn't have the cloaking device. That was on the original Defiant, which was destroyed. But yeah, it was. I found it a little bit like a fan service. I know I hate using that word, and I don't want to say that because I think it's wrong to say that, but I get why people say that, and I know that I've just said that. You know what I mean? And they've done that straight off the off. When they done Star Trek Discovery, they put Spock in there. There was no need for them to recast Spock or even do that. But I think I understand why they do it, but there was no need to do it. The fan base was already there. And, you know, but like I said, we'll get on Discovery another time. But I just felt a little bit like it was a bit of fan service. Especially when they brought characters back like Ro Laren, Elizabeth Shelby, and Tuvok. I just felt that was, you know, it was great to see him, don't get me wrong, it was great and it worked with the story. But once again, I just felt that was a little bit of like fan service, if you know what I mean. What I also didn't get as well is how much time they spent at 10 forward, either on the holodeck or back on Earth, sort of thing. And we didn't see Guinan the whole time. Yet we saw her in the second season. But for this one, she wasn't even there, which also tells me I know that there was. It probably was due to the controversy that she come out with. There was some controversy that she said on her show, but it also shows maybe they blew their budget to get her. Also, it's worth noting as well that they did try to get other people from Star Trek to appear on Picard, and they turned it down. One noticeably was Chakotay, I believe, that they wanted Chakotay to come back to sort of do something, but he said he couldn't. Though I think they're going to pick up the Chakotay story on Star Trek Prodigy, which we'll do on another podcast. But yeah, ultimately I did enjoy Star Trek Picard, but it follows the recipe of every Star Trek series that's come out. There's been some exceptions to this formula that I've said. I hope everyone agrees with me with this, because it's my formula, but I've always thought of it, and I've never really discussed it with a lot of people. People that I have discussed it with have sort of haven't given me their sort of like, yeah, okay. But I want you guys to tell me, and that is that Star Trek only gets better after season 3, from season 3 onwards. And the reason I say that, if you exclude the animated series, including Lower Decks, and you exclude the original series, TOS, but take Next Generation. So the Next Generation got better from season 3 onwards. Seasons 1 and 2 were very hit and miss and all over the place. Season 3, the show, the writing, everything got better after, from season 3 onwards. Deep Space Nine, once again, I think got better after from season 3 onwards, because that's when the Defiant was introduced. It was when we got Captain Sisko. The writing got a little bit better, and everything else. Then you've got Star Trek Voyager. Once again, I think it got better after season 3. We left the Kazon, we left the Vidians, we left all of that other stuff behind. Season 3 for me became a little bit better. Storytelling, there were some really good episodes, not so good, but in both of those, in all of these sort of scenarios, there is some good and bad. But you can't argue that the series got better on Next Gen, DS9 and Voyager after season 3. It even happened on Enterprise. I think seasons 1 and 2 are okay. Season 3, I think it became much, much better after season 3. Season 3 was obviously the Xindi arc, which was sort of like a continuous story, but it was much more better written, much more darker than the other two. Once again, after season 3, it got better. Then got cancelled. Discovery. So Discovery season 1 was, in my eyes, very, very hit and miss. Season 2 was slightly better, but Season 3, when they went into the far future, I think it got a little bit better. And I a little bit better, but it did get better after Season 3. Star Trek Picard, once again, it's shown us that formula that I'm discussing only intensifies with Picard, because the first season, once again, very hit and miss. Season 2 was slightly better than Season 1, but Season 3 is sort of the home run of it. And I'm wondering whether it's because it was the last season, they just threw everything at it. They just threw everything at it because they knew that they were never going to do another show like this where it has them all in. Like I said, there are some exceptions to this. The animated series, I think the original animated series was really good right from the get-go. Star Trek Lower Decks, once again, it's been a hit all the way through. I think it came at the right time. Lower Decks did, for animation style and for storytelling. I think it's brilliant. We've had 3 seasons of that, so yeah, I'm happy with them. All of them have been very good. Once again, though, I think with Lower Decks, I think you can arguably say that as the seasons have gone on, it's gotten better and better and better. So once again, there's that going for it. And now we're at Strange New Worlds. Now, Strange New Worlds was really a good series for the first season. Can it still pick that up in Season 2? And does that mean that Season 3 will be even better than the previous 2? If my formula is correct, then that would be right. But only time will tell. But getting back to Picard, I don't have a problem with them christening the Titan A as now the Enterprise G. But by doing that, I think that what they've done now is there's no Titan anymore. And if they do another ship, it will just be the Titan. But I think the last Titan became the Enterprise G. In terms of name, anyway, in terms of lineage and name. So I have a sort of problem with that, because there was a perfect opportunity for them to do another ship on that scene, actually. A bit like on the original Star Trek movies, where Sulu sort of sees the Excelsior in the back, but it's sort of behind the Enterprise. I think they could have done that. I think you could have had the Titan. The shuttle could have come over and he's gone, oh, it's the Titan, and then they could have said it's behind it, sort of thing, or they could have gone, it's actually next to it, and then you see, and it's the Enterprise G. I think that might have been a slightly better thing to do. That's just me, because now what's going to happen is I'm almost certain, because we're, with Eagle Moss, the Star Trek company that was producing all the ships, obviously it's not about anymore. Corgi have now come on board, and they've said they're definitely doing the Titan. And I think the problem now is, even if Eagle Moss was about, is how do they label it? Do they label it the Titan A or the Enterprise G? And that, you know what I mean? You could end up with two, the exact same model, but it's just two different names. Anyway, that's just me. So elements of Star Trek Picard I loved. I just thought the episodes, it was just good. I think the last 2 episodes are sort of a breakaway from the rest of the series. I hope other people sort of agree with me with that, because for 7 episodes it was, it was a changeling plot. It was about the changelings. And then obviously, spoiler alert, she gets killed, Vedek gets killed, and the ship gets destroyed. And then it sort of switches tempo. It's like, oh, now it's the Borg. And it's like, oh, we're just going to get the changelings. And I know the Queen mentioned how she used them to introduce the pathogen into the transporter and stuff like that, and there was that was explained, but it just felt like it was so far removed from that, if you know what I mean. It was just, there was all these theories, and I came up with one thinking it was the Par Wraiths and everything, and they were like, oh no, it's the Borg. And I also want to point out as well that is effectively the destruction of the Borg. I was talking to my brother actually about this, and obviously there's been a few actually. There was one in season 1, the artifact that was disconnected. There was one in Star Trek Prodigy as well, and I think a lot of people have mentioned this as well. What about the one that was in Star Trek Prodigy? The one in Star Trek Prodigy was disconnected from the hive, and was effectively adrift, and they activated it, didn't they? So there was that. But this there's a lot of ways they can play this out. So effectively, the Borg are no more in canon universe, in the Prime universe. There was a lot of confusion because they were like, oh, hang on, there was a Borg in season 2 with Janetti. That came from an alternate timeline. So obviously Picard went back to stop what happened to Europa, to make sure something bad didn't happen. But obviously the Borg Queen went into Janetti. She went off in that timeline. So in a different timeline, Picard was sent back, and then obviously the Queen, Janetti, Queen, Borg, whatever, came back to help the Federation from another timeline. So she's sort of like the good Borg, if you know what I mean. She's part of a different collective and a different Queen. Nothing ever to do with what we've just seen on the end of Star Trek Picard. So it sort of picks up from where Voyager left off, where Admiral Janeway future Admiral Janeway, I should say, introduced the neural pathogen, which disrupted the Queen's link to the collective, which effectively destroyed the Borg hub. And now we know as well is that it disrupted everything. So it almost destroyed the Borg. What remnants of what we knew as the collective was what we saw in Star Trek Picard, and now that's completely wiped out. There is cubes still about. Like I said, we saw one in Star Trek Picard. There's the artifact. Cubes are still about, but they're leaderless. Voyager did do a series, an episode actually, where they liberated some Borg, where they kept their own minds but were still Borg. I think they could go down that route if they choose to continue the Borg story. They've done it in Star Trek Online as well with the Cooperative, it's called, which are like a rogue Borg faction. So they're not like the collective in assimilating and stuff like that. They have been assimilated, and now they've got their personality back. They can think for themselves, but they're still Borg, if you know what I mean. So you got the Cooperative, they're called in Star Trek Online. So they could do that with what's remaining, because I would imagine there's a lot of cubes still around, just not connected, just dormant like they were in Star Trek Picard. So there's always a way of them coming back, I think. But in terms of what we know as the Borg, that's now gone. There's no Queen now. There's no collective. There's no assimilating. There's nothing like that anymore. So yeah, they've effectively just wiped out the Borg in Star Trek Picard. One of the best villains of Star Trek is that. I also want to talk about, before I go, I want to talk about the end credits of Star Trek Picard. So if you haven't watched it, or you have watched it and you've just turned it off after the credits when they were playing poker, don't. Continue to watch it until the camera finishes panning up. Then we get a cut scene, and it's with Jack. He's obviously undoing he's going through his bag. He's putting down ornaments and stuff in his room. Turns around, and there's Q. And he said that his trial was about to begin, but he said, hang on, humanity's trial has ended. He said, yes, it has, but his one had just begun. Now, if that doesn't signal there's going to be a new Star Trek series, I don't know what is, you know what I mean? They have teased it, the showrunners teased it a few times, actually. You know, he's come out with the hashtag, he's come out with saying, you know, there's a thing, you know, called Star Trek Legacy. So we could get a new Star Trek series panned, but I mean, all we know of the new Star Trek stuff coming out, we know that Lower Decks has been renewed, we know that Star Trek Project E has been renewed, we know that Star Trek Strange New Worlds Seasons 2 is due out very soon, and then Season 3, we also know that they've recorded Season 3, but we don't know about a Season 4. And they've obviously just come out as well and said that they're going to do the home movie, I should say it was called, Star Trek Section 31. And we'll discuss that all on another channel, but I just wanted to say what I thought about Picard, and yeah, it was a good episode, a good series. It ended on a high, which is what you want, which is what all good things did as well. So the show ended on a high. This one ended on a high. But I think it's clear to say now that this is the last time we'll probably get the whole crew together. I'm pretty certain that if they do this Star Trek Legacy and they do bring about crew and stuff like that, I'm almost certain that we'll have cameos from a lot of those guys, but I think seeing them all together, I think even Picard now, I think he's gonna step away. Like I said, I'll be very, very surprised if we see them all in a show again. But at this point, you got to say at this point, never say never, really, because anything can happen, couldn't it? Really, but I would assume this was high, and it was the first Star Trek show, I think, since Next Generation that was on sort of the top 10 best shows to watch on streaming and all that sort of stuff, and the most watched during one or two of the weeks, and it's never been on this list before. So it just shows you that this is the way they should be going. It's taken them a while, but hopefully this is a good step. But yeah, I just don't see it going in. I enjoyed Season 3 better than the other two seasons, much better than the other two seasons. Very much enjoyed it. There were things I think you could poke holes at, but I think overall it was really done. It was done well. It was done good. I'm extremely happy. I think most people are that watched it. But anyway, but thank you for joining me on my first Star Trek podcast. Like I said, if you want to join me on this podcast and discuss anything, just tell me and I'll give you a link and we'll go live and we'll discuss it. But as always, thank you for listening. It's been a pleasure. I'll be back soon from engineering. And yeah, so just thank you for listening. And I hope to hear from you lot soon and from me. But I'm going to go now. I've got to deal with this warp core. And I'll see you next time. Well, I'll hear you next time. I keep saying that because I'm so used to YouTube. I will see you next time. I will hear you next time. I did it again. Man. You will hear me next time. I've been Kev from the Nexus here in Main Engineering. And we'll hear you, can't believe that, at the next one. Take it easy.